Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the adjourned planning committee. First of all, say apology for absence.
Yes, we have received apologies from councillors McCall, Boltinger, and Verbo and Wilkinson.
The order of business.
Order of business is as per the agenda distributed for the 10th of June. There's however a late paper.
Yes, I was just going to say, you'll have seen as a result of the workshop paper that we had, the workshop meeting that we had last Thursday, that there is now a substitute paper under 5.1. I have to put it to members if they are prepared to accept the substitute paper on the agenda. That accept. Right. Thank you very much. Substitute. Actually, Diana's an example. I'll just leave this. Sorry. Right, okay. Sorry, right. Everybody's got access to that page. That will, can I just say that having agreed that will then be uploaded on the website. Declarations of interest. Usual situation, you can declare it now or declare against the item. Don't see any rights to crack on. Minute of the previous meeting, which was held on the 29th of April. Just for your again, these minutes have been circulated in the history for a while. Nobody's come back, so I'm assuming you're all happy with it. I read that's a true record of the planning before the 29th. Thank you very much. That then takes us on to the first of the public reports, 5.1 substitute paper, or now actually the paper.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the latest calculations of supply and demand land for housing. So sets out a short list of potential sites to meet the local housing land requirement for NLDB. At its meeting on the 25th of June 2024, Council set a local housing land requirement for NLDB2 of 8,851 units. This figure was confirmed by Scottish ministers as part of the evidence gate check process. Based on the housing figures set out in the 2024 housing land audit, land for a minimum of 1,660 dwellings needs to be identified in NLDB2 to supplement the existing supply. However, this figure may be adjusted slightly once the 2025 housing land audit is completed. In addition, it is also a requirement of NPF4 that the local development plan identify areas that may be suitable for homes beyond the 10-year NLDB2 period. In response to a call for ideas and opportunities exercise in 2024 and a site search exercise by officers, approximately 16,500 dwellings are being promoted. This figure significantly exceeds Midlothian's target, and as such, it is proposed to undertake an initial shortlisting exercise to remove those sites which have potential constraints, not suitable sustainable locations, or have the potential for significant environmental, community, or infrastructure impacts. Following an elected member workshop on the 19th of June, the shortlist was amended. The shortlist would enable a more focused assessment of fewer sites and does not automatically mean that the site on the shortlist is proposed in the proposed plan. The recommendation is for the committee to note the latest position regarding effective housing land supply, to consider the shortlist of new housing sites and indicate any that they do not wish taken forward for further consideration, and also to agree the shortlist as a basis for progressing the proposed plan. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thanks very much indeed. And just to point out right away at the outset that shortlisting doesn't mean that will end up as a site within the local plan that we then submit Scottish Government. So today's exercise is about a big number coming down to a number that the planner will now be tasked, subject to the committee approval, to take away, have a look at, give the plus and minuses about each an individual site that will then be pulled together, and then that will come back to the planning committee for further consideration. So I want to put on record, I think it was absolutely super that we had a workshop, because for the first time, we actually, all 18 of us, got together and looked at all the sites and were able to discuss in a Midlothian manner, not just in a local ward member manner. I personally think that was a very good exercise. It's my intention to do another exercise on economic development land and also community facilities as part of another workshop, so we can then start to map out what we as elected members see for the future of Midlothian. And I do think it's right and proper that the more of us that get involved in it, the better it is. We all have our individual wards that we represent, but at the same time, we actually represent the whole of Midlothian. It's terribly important that we do that exercise together. And I thought actually last Thursday was really, really good with very constructive, and it does give us an opportunity to take the thing forward and instruct the parish to get on and do that particular job. But Kelly, sorry, Councillor Cummins, you were indicating you wanted to come in.
Thank you. I just like to draw attention to page 9 of the report, where it says in St David's and the number of units being 15. We're obviously aware of the 6 1.5 story units approved for the church hall site. But I would be interested to find out where the other 9 units proposed for St David's site have came from, and where you plan to actually put them.
So that to find it, are you?
That's right, yeah. That's the picture.
I know there's no page number.
It's just because it's on your computer, it's page 9.
Yeah. No, sorry. Yeah, no, it's as part of the officer search. We've obviously looked at potential sites that the council owned. So in doing so, we've spoken to internal colleagues about how many units potentially could get on the site. So that was the initial feedback. But in terms of the detail of the site, that will come later. But we can obviously, when we get amongst that, we can talk in a bit more detail at that point.
I'm not really understanding that, because you have 6 units that have been approved by council
Yes.
for the church hall site. The only way that you could fit another 9 additional units in there would be if you were to talk about the library site. And I'm really not understanding how you can allocate this for housing when it's actually public space and it's occupied. I don't understand how that can work, because it's not being assigned for closure, therefore it's not suitable for allocating for housing.
Sure. Yes, it's not allocated just yet. It's just a short list to look at in more detail. So
I still don't understand how it can be put on a short list if it's actually public open space and that we are currently have occupied and there's been no decision to close that library.
Right, okay, before we get into
Yeah.
do we, don't we? And I just suggest that it's one that if you want to transfer, well, you can move, take it out.
That was my next.
An existing library site, then you've got every.
Yeah, that was my next.
I'm sure that's our stock. I'll back you up on that.
Yeah, I think it should be removed from consideration because that site is currently off.
But I think that's the easiest way to cut to the cheese.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Tune and then Councillor Spring.
Thanks, Chair. On a general line, Peter, if I may. You mentioned units. I'm not clearly defining how big or how small these units are, because if I can be parochial for a second, in my ward, we're having terrible problems with larger housing requirements for larger houses. So I don't know what these units are, what sizes of these units are going to be.
Yeah.
Changes that much amount.
no, at the moment, the units that are in the table are those unit numbers which are being promoted by the land or developer. They're not the numbers being put forward at this stage by the planning authority. That's just what the landowner is promoting at this stage. And they're not set in stone, and there's no detail behind that in terms of bedroom numbers, flats, dwelling houses, split, etc. That's just an indicative number at this stage.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, some of the wider issues I think perhaps we could talk about before we go around the table looking at sites that the liaison we had with the community council, I thought that was an excellent meeting. It took a lot of tension out of the situation, but we're still left, as you know, with the position. Partly 8851 we've identified, there are roughly 4,000 sites that are constrained or private field. And some of these will, between now and the commencement of this plan in 2027, be liable to come back into numbers. I just wonder what the mechanism is. If at the end of the committee we say yes, is that at the end of it, or if, for example, Redsheet ceases to be the constrained site, which is a very big one, 750 houses, does that then reduce the need for us to be adding extra sites in at this meeting? The other thing that came out of the consultation was the state question of the status of the long grass sites, and I'll call them, the ones that the Scottish Government wants us to identify for beyond 2037. There is a concern that the Scottish Government might lean on that and bring these forward. And we were conscious of the decision that they reported on the petrol station site and the other land, where they said we're going to get lead on its sites and building, therefore we are going to let this go through, even though the planning officers quite correctly said that it wasn't within policy for us to allow that development. And I'm just fearful that by not having much of a debate about those long-term sites, there may be an impetus that will initially lead to increased land values. It can lead to an assumption when the developers go to deal and go to the photo that because we put a light yellow bubble, that therefore there was an impetus for this to become an actual plan, even although in theory it would be helpful if you could tell me where we exactly stand on these points.
Yeah, okay. Just to start with the numbers issue, you're correct. The numbers being worked out at the moment are based on those sites that we know that can be delivered. So that means you've got sites which are currently constrained or they're long-term safeguards. And the current practice is that between now and the adoption of the next local plan, they become unconstrained, so they go into the mix, or some of the longer-term safeguards that are already in the plan, 2017 plan, could come forward and go into the pot as well.
So if Redsheet thing about the 1660 would reduce by 750, is that correct?
Well, Red Hue's, if you think Red Hue is split into Red Hue East, Red Hue West. Red Hue East has a plan principle for approximately 700 units. So that's in the numbers, as it were, because that's in the mix. There's also a longer term component of it, which is a 650. So that's a lot. There is constraint on that site because of the potential bridging of the railway, which is a big issue. There's been progress being made to try and unconstrain that site, i.e. reach agreement to bridge the railway. So it's about timing here. If we can resolve the constraint, the numbers go into the pot. If it stays constrained, they don't. So
if there's a chance that 1660 is too high a number, we might find it comes down, in which case we don't have to develop out so much.
That's correct. And it's also just worth noting, which is stated in the report, it's also based on anticipated build rates between now and when the plan is adopted. Mm-hmm. And for the last year, for example, less units were built than originally anticipated. So that 1,660 figure just drops because of that arrangement as well. I think the issue for us is we're working through the 2025 housing audit at the moment. And when we come to committee with that in October, probably October, we'll then just totally start setting out all the exact position of all the numbers. So we'll have a clearer picture of some of these uncertainties. But at the moment, we're working to the 1,660. We're trying to unlock all the constrained sites that we have, which is not the only one we have. There's also one, for example, Whitehill House in Rosewell. I think that's more south, despite being in Rosewell. So there are other ones that we're trying to unconstrain to put in the pot. The second point, Chair, just to be, again, revisiting the issue, Spell raised the point again about whether if it's in the short list or it has some sort of status, whether a reporter, that gives it some sort of weight later on. I think the reporter must probably expect us to do this sort of exercise where you're starting to evaluate, rationalise it and downsize. And it doesn't have status unless you allocate it in the proposed plan, not the shortlist, the proposed plan. And then the other additional thing is the long-term site or direction of development that needs to be identified. So that is important. I think the key here is that to give weight to a local plan so that you're not undermined by reporters' decisions, to make sure those sites that are allocated can be delivered, they're deliverable, i.e. they don't become constrained sites in the future.
There's a hint in that the report could bring forward those, like the other sites, the long grass sites, and confirm that we haven't got much in the council or any of them for debated those, because all virtually
They've all been subject to detailed planning at that time.
I think you've described a dynamic where we've got the government could start to play around with things.
But also there's obviously elected member decision making in terms of proposed plans, then final adoption plan. But of course, that proposed plan has to go through a process of examination by Scottish Government reporters. So there is that input into it. But the whole point of the new system, i.e. the gate check, is that you're not having a fight necessarily over numbers at the later stage, because that decision's already been made by elected members and then reinforced by Scottish ministers at the evidence gate check.
That just give you another reassurance, councillor Smith. You're on to a good point. The way I personally see it, and there's somebody at the committee looking on it the same way, is that we do the shortlisting today as a result, whatever we have in the workshop. We give, you take in, you take out as and when. We then instruct the planners to get on with that. That's then going to be taken down the way to meet with the numbers that will be required to deliver over the 10 years. I personally don't think we should get caught up on the post-2037 number of the sites, because there may be sites that don't get into the final local plan that have been shortlisted that might make sense, who knows, at a future date, that might go into, here I say, the long grass. So, for example, there may be a site that we say, go and have a look at that planners. Today, it's not on the shortlist, doesn't make it to the final cut. I think it may be the committee might want to take that into consideration post 2037. So it may be that some of the bubbles fall away completely or get burst. If you know where I'm coming from. So there's another exercise, I think, done by us as a committee, along with the planners.
Can I add one other thing, sorry, Chair? It's just worth remembering, we started off with proposals for 16,500 units. Now, to try and calculate what the impact of that is in terms of transport infrastructure, community facility, it's impossible until we've got a better idea of some of the options. So to enable us to do a transport assessment, to enable us to get into the next level of detailed education colleagues, we need something to be more workable than the vastness of that 16,500.
Here's whether the reports will act against our interests, and they have done in the past.
Yeah, I obviously can't prejudge them. All I can do is get the proposed plan to be as robust as possible. Yeah. So the position is as strong as possible, so that we can defend that position.
Okay. Councillor Molly.
Yeah, Peter, I just want to go back on that last answer. You talked about how you calculate the effect on transport roads and stuff like that. How do we calculate that? We've already got 8,851 houses in this plan, and you've got thousands and thousands of houses already lying in older plans in that. The transport system, as in roads, is already out of our hands. I mean, we've been sitting for 20 years waiting on Sheriff Hall being developed, and nothing happened. We had a public inquiry years ago that we've been sitting on for over a year without any movement on it. And if you actually went to do that work, I'm assuming it's going to take you about another 4 or 5 years before you get in it. We look at the train system and the capacity, it trains in Midlothian which was going to be the big godsend, that we're going to have everybody coming out of cars and going out trains, and you've got 3 carriages twice an hour if they turn up. The bus services didn't sit in your hands, we didn't control them. So there's all these different gaps here. How do we ensure that we'll have, and that's just on transport. Now, we've sat for years talking about health and stuff like that. Everybody sitting in this room knows how difficult it is to get an appointment with a GP. They know the waiting lists in hospitals, etc. They know the pressure on care homes and all that stuff. I'm just wondering at what stage, when we've already got these problems now, I mean, the thousands of houses that are already approved, why would any sensible person think that we could take any additionality until we had answers on all these critical things, on health, on transport, and even, dare I say, on education?
Yeah, no, it's fair point, Chair. No, I guess we're trying to find those answers, and through additional work and assessments, we'll try to set those out a bit more clearly. The last local plan did pieces of work like a transport assessment, which identified strategic interventions, and has worked towards those. I appreciate some cases, Chair, Paul Roundabout was referenced, that they've not happened yet. So that is a fundamental problem, fundamental issue, some of which is in our control, some of which isn't in our control. But what we are presented with is a position where we've got a housing target, which we have to deliver. And if the elected members don't make the decision about housing sites, then someone else will make them for you, effectively, i.e. the reporter. So you are in a position, a very difficult position, where you are in an area of growth, high housing demand, and pressure on infrastructure. I really do appreciate it. Some of the transport stuff's out of our control, some of the GP type issues are out of our control. So it's doing the best we can, but it's far from a perfect situation.
So can I just be clear here, who sets the local housing land requirement? Because we have it at 8,851, and we're now being told we need to take another 1,660. But if you go back to 2024, council agreed to keep it at 8,851, which is already what's in the plan. So if somebody's moved the goalposts, who moved them?
The 8,851, 8,850 was the minimum target set by NPF4 Scottish Government. That was the minimum target, so the council decided to go 1 unit above that. So that's where the answer. But that target doesn't start until the adoption of the next local plan. So what's happening is, of course, every unit that's getting built between now and the next local plan's adoption effectively comes off your supply. So that 1,660 is the anticipated shortfall at the time of the next local plan's adoption.
It's not an addition to the 1,800. No, it's what's left after you take into consideration all the building that will go on between now and we hope 2027 when it's adopted.
Yeah,
If it's adopted, doesn't it?
Yeah,
It pulls it down from there.
that's correct. We think, based on the numbers we have at the moment, that by the time we get to the end of March 2027, we'll have an existing supply of 7,191. So that's why you need that 1,660 to plug that gap. Yeah.
Yes. Because Alexander.
Yeah, I really endorse everything that Councillor Milligan says, but it's not just transport and doctors, it's schools, it's the environment where people are actually going to live. And, you know, where are young people going to play? We do build playgrounds, etc., for, you know, very young people, but you're talking about there's nowhere for older people, you know, for people, you know, teenagers, for adults my age, for, you know, your age, actually go. And where is the money coming from to build the facilities that we need for everyone to live in a proper environment, not just a place where you go and, you know, in your home. And that's being asked of me from constituents and from other people. You know, we have developers' money, but that goes into specific things like schools, and it doesn't fully compensate for the increases that we're going to need in our schools. Things like transport. And I just, is there plenty Scottish government money or UK money coming that's going to build on these facilities? And I know we've got school halls and all the rest of it, but they're under PPI or PPP, and we can't really use them. So I just wonder about the general infrastructure. Also, we seem to be building places sort of bigger and bigger around communities, and not really thinking about how that is going to impact on the climate in the future. We've already got flooding issues, surface flooding, and I know that there is work going ahead and being looked at for the future. But do we have the money as well? Is there all the money in place that's going to actually be able to do all the things that we need for these climate changes? And do we have the money that we're going to need as well to retrofit all the places that we are building now that doesn't have the future-proof infrastructure to take heating, the central heating and all the rest of it? So I've probably got a lot more questions, but I can't think of them just now.
Yeah, just to start, I suppose the general point about the impact of growth, obviously settlements growing, etc. Yeah, the sort of planning process, and we're familiar through the committee, which is the argument about developer contributions. So there is a remit where plan applications come forward, you take developer contributions, and those contributions are designed to mitigate the impact of that development. It's not to solve other existing deficits in infrastructure or facilities, but it's to mitigate the impact. So, you'll be familiar, for example, in Bonnyrigg, since Oakfield 1, Roomy now, Daisy South, Daisy Mains, you've now got Oakfield 2, so that's about 3,000 units. As a consequence of that, we've secured over 50 million pounds of the developer contribution, which goes into schools, transport, etc. So there is an upside to the building in terms of that investment, as well as 400 plus portable units in Bonnyrigg. So there is a benefit to it, but I appreciate that there's an impact as well. But I guess the bottom line is the development industry just can't mitigate the whole impact. It's wider than just taking money off developers. And we're predominantly talking house builders, taking off house builders to meet all the problems that are existing in communities and society. And some of that is just simply out with our control, by wider government policy.
That when we build new developments, it isn't just that development that is the problem, it's the effect it has on the whole, say, of Bonnyrigg.
Mhm.
And building a new development like that, although you're mitigating or inside that development, we're not really mitigating for the effect that has on our existing roads and on our existing infrastructure that was just built for Bonnyrigg as it was. And this has happened so quickly. And although Bonnyrigg, I think it's only getting an extra 6 houses or something, it's not a huge amount. The effect of all the other building that's going on in all the other parts of Midlothian is having an effect on Bonnyrigg.
Sure.
And I'm just talking about Bonnyrigg, but it's, Bridge, Pennycook, everywhere is being affected.
Sure.
Councillor Scott.
Yeah.
Oh, bring you back in.
Sorry, it was just to reinforce that Gorebridge, as an example, has had lots of house building and has had very little infrastructure. In fact, most of the developer contributions have gone out with people to, the facilities at Senior Battle High School. So what happens is, and you'll know this, like Bonnery Draws, all of these big teams, you've got Anderson Rangers, you've got Newt Grange, they can't even get lets to actually go in, to play the games. So they have to go, some of them have to go to Port Bell or East Lothian, especially the adults team. So for me, all these houses, people need houses, and I'm very happy that houses are getting built. But unless communities see the benefit of being needs, if all the developers' contributions go out with the area and people see very little, and they're also having to travel to get to it, I think that communities are quite likely going to be up in arms about it. So I think MLDP 2 is for infrastructure first. So I accept that this is the list, and the next time we'll tie in the infrastructure, and I think that would be absolutely imperative for the local communities to know all these buildings, what are we going to get.
Councillor Smell, that's something,
Let's put this in context. 8851, and with a reasonable expectation from the lucky bag of strange sites in Wimpole, it'll end up about 10,000 houses over a 10-year period. Sort of thing. With 40,000 houses in that million, that calculates to me, please correct me, that's wrong. That's a 25% growth over a 10-year period. The previous number I've seen for a 10-year period within the past was 13.4%. So the growth rate appears to me to be very high, although I know your staff have mentioned to me that we got off quite lightly here. I'm not sure about that. The one thing that everyone around this table, I think, agrees is that our developer contributions have to rise quite sharply. And we talk about it in this room year after year, and it hasn't been reviewed for very many years. And I just want to be up with when are we actually going to sit down with the developers and sort out much higher developer contributions to review of all the issues that Councillor Alexander has raised.
Yeah. Right, so there was a question sort of came out, I just didn't have a chance to answer it. So going back to your point, Councillor Scott, some of the developer contributions, they are very much in the ward, the primary schools, Gorglen Primary School, maybe the Beacon, Thorbridge, but some of those contributions are dependent on where the infrastructure demand is. So the Borders Rail Lines, the Classic or the A7, they go through multiple wards, multiple settlements, and obviously the New Battle High School covers multiple areas, so it's at times it's not necessarily in the same ward. So I acknowledge that. Yeah, I suppose the developer contribution point, Chair, is that I've looked at it for a few years, but a few years ago we did an exercise with other councils, and clothing's pretty well top of the table when it takes developer contributions. The volume's pretty substantial in terms of what we take. And the rules are, it's about mitigating the impact of that development. It's not just a sort of an open opportunity to ask for whatever you want. There's got to be a justification and a link back to the development itself. In terms of new policy, Chair, that needs to be, the new system needs to be part of the local plan. It's not separate guidance. So we're currently working on a draft that will go with the proposed plan. So members will obviously get to make a decision about that as we work through that process. So that's
that explanation before, but clearly the contributions are not keeping up with inflation in terms of our build cost in the business. And I'm conscious of other councils that are starting to do it.
Yeah, they're index linked in the majority of times. There are exceptions, but they're index linked to inflation. Sometimes with inflation, you're a bit behind the curve if it's going up steeply, but you then gain on the downtrend. So there's winners and losers, but yeah, they are index linked.
Councillor Cullen.
Thanks, yeah. Probably just some of people comments on record that I said at the seminar. I think a lot of the public frustration, certainly around Shaw Fair, I think everybody knows what's coming. It's been massive plan for over 2 decades, but we're seeing it now, seen it for the last 6-7 years. And there is an expectation and realisation of what's coming, but I think a lot of the frustration, in fact, when I say anger, I think a lot of the anger, public anger, comes from the disruption to the road network. I think as a planning authority, we'd probably do a little bit better in future-proofing some of the infrastructure work. So if we can use the example that I used in seminars, At Motherhill, the A6106 on a four-way roundabout, there was four-way traffic lights put in for about 4 weeks. For the installation of a high voltage lines. Now, the road was reinstated and reopened for about another 3 weeks until one of the developers came in to tie into that infrastructure, which once again resulted in another 3 or 4 week closure with 4-way traffic lights, more congestion, more emissions, etc. Now, it's not a criticism of the contractor who initially installed the high voltage lines. I'm assuming they did what they were required to do. But my understanding is if there was a simple, I'm not sure what the process was, but if ducting and tails were installed during that initial installation, it would have very much minimised the time into other developments. So if we can just take note of that for future sort of road infrastructure works. As I say, I think a lot of frustration, much of the frustration comes from that local disruption that's on a direct impact on people.
See that, if that could be included as part of policy.
It's a fair point, one way to practically trying to resolve that sort of issue.
Right, well, Councillor Mackenzie next.
To start with second, and Councillor Curran went off and I'm on that very road, and I sit there thinking I should write to local councillor about this. You might still get a letter from the CV, but I fully second. Yeah. Can I just tell us what the other way around on this, because we're very much talking about the problems associated with housing, and those problems are true and they're real. Yeah, houses, roads, all these things. But on that list of problems that we have, we also have housing. So I don't see the logic personally in saying we shouldn't do the housing thing, because doing the housing thing enables us to put a tick against one of those problems at least. So I very much see that getting a good plan for people in Cronin moving forward is at least us dealing with one of our many problems. And I do also understand the worry about ever increasing numbers of people. But again, if we build the right houses in the right places for the right people, most of the people that are going into these houses already live in Vermilion. We're talking about people whose parents are 24, 25 and can't move out of mum and dad's house. We're talking about 3 generations living in the one house. We're talking about folk that basically can't get upstairs to use the bathroom, that are living in the living room and using a commode. If we build the right houses, then we can alleviate a lot of that real suffering for families. What you hear from me is that I probably support the work that's done here, and I'm not scared of house building, but it will come down to us in detailed planning consents to make sure we build the right houses.
Thank you. Back to the Councillor McEwen, and I'll bring you back in against Councillor Alexander.
Thanks, Chair. A general question. I'm trying to get my head around the planning process and the systems. I'm glad we've got legal representation here. Taking on board what Councillor Milligan was saying about control, it seems that we don't have control fully in the planning process. We've given planning, we issue planning, we're looking for development. We're in this situation where we have a shortage of houses, mainly due to developers not instigating and commissioning the sites. The sites seem to lie for years sometime, and we don't get them commissioned. And all due diligence was given to the last local plan, Peter, with all due respect, but it's not all been initiated, it's not all been instigated. And I find that very frustrating when we've got to take cognizance, as Councillor Milligan said about the control on the last plan, and we're discussing the next plan, when really we're not commissioning and installing what we've already decided and what the community expects. So I'm wondering, from a legal perspective, going forward in planning process, is there something the council can put in place when planning permission is given to make them legally binding, that they've got to at least instigate these sites and get some action, please?
Yeah, sorry, I'm certainly happy to give a legal perspective on that. I mean, the point you make has been noted down the years, but planning permission is, as we said, permissive. It allows for units or permission to be implemented. The local authority doesn't have any powers to help. So, whilst the council can grant permission, really are in the hands of the developers or the applicants to implement and carry out that development. See, Peter, coming in there, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
Yeah, no, I was a couple of things I was going to say was one, permissions are granted, and there's a duration condition which triggers the commencement's got to be within a certain time period. The default position is 3 years, but there's no, you can't condition to complete it. So you can start within a period and not complete. So that's the first thing. The second thing on a sort of bigger scale, I guess, is the fact that it is sort of moving feet all the time, and that you don't start a plan, complete it, and then start the next one. They do overlap. So there are situations where you're trying to juggle problems from one plan into the next one. You are constantly evolving and moving. And the opening gambit, I think, was about whether we control everything. And the answer to that, no, we control some things, but not everything. There's other players in this. Obviously, the development industry, the Scottish government, etc. So there's multiple players in that planning and development business, and we're just one of the players.
But if you don't mind me saying, Chair, there's an expectation when planning's given, after it being sought and it's given, our communities expect that to come to fruition and to manifest itself. There's an expectation communities prepare for these developments being developed. There are 2 sites where I live that nothing's been done, and planning, I think, was given 10 years ago. And Goldbridge, so I would have expected some sort of legal movement from us to say, we need to get these sites going. The community expect them. It's an aspiration that we've given.
There isn't, Councillor McEwen. The reality is that we made a lot of lobbying many, many years ago, and we got it changed. The only thing we got out of it was, instead of 5-year planning permission to start, it's now down to 3. The thing is, you cannot compel people to do anything. Even with a piece of paper saying you've got planning permission, you cannot compel them to do anything. And if you do push them, all they do is put a JCB in, dig a hole, and that's deemed to have planning permissions, planning started. So therefore they could sit on a site for many, many years ahead of that. Now, we haven't come across that in Midlothian, but we can't do anything about that.
But if you don't mind me saying, Chair, this is compounding to our housing shortage. Compounding to the housing shortage on the percentage that we expect to become available for social housing. That's just compounding it as time goes on.
25%.
Yeah.
Councillor Alexander again, and Councillor Ford.
Just to add to what Councillor Farrell was saying, could, as part of the conditions, be that most of the road works be done at night? And, when the rush hour starts around about 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock, say, and again in the evening, to try and get as many roads open during that time. And the other thing was planning conditions. So if, as Councillor McEwen says, that you have site, it's got planning permission, but they don't do anything for 10 years. That condition, as far as I'm aware, the conditions go back to 10 years ago. It doesn't correspond to the present conditions. So they get away with putting in older lights, older infrastructure that isn't, of these standard.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things there. If they don't implement a plan permission after a period of time, usually 3 years, and that's that point, so that permission goes. You can't then implement it 10 years down the line. That permission falls unless they commence implementation of it. I think there's another issue to do with the building warrant process, which is checking the structural integrity of buildings, looking at the technology. So when you're looking at are they the most modern, up-to-date, environmentally friendly buildings, there are processes within building warrant where a developer's maybe got their building warrant under a previous regime. And of course, house building takes sometimes years to complete a site. So by the time the site's completed, it's maybe of technology which was 10 years ago, but there's no longer, or it's been bettered. So there is a time lag because although new urban want assessments are always against the current regulations, timing regulations continue to evolve. So if you cite in your own ward, for example, Hopefield one took over 10 years to build. So of course, when you get the warrant at the start of the process under that regime, by the time you actually complete the site, it's possibly 10 years out. I think that's just the nature of the thing, I'm afraid. It just seems to be that way. You're always sort of following or chasing the advancement of the regulations.
The thing is that we then have to pick up the bill for, updating, lighting, etc.
Sure. Yeah. The other question was about the roadworks, which it's unusual to try and insist someone to do roadworks at night. I mean, obviously they're often more disruptive, the sort of ambient noise levels down, people, children, etc., and sleep in bed. So it's not often the norm that we want roadworks to be done overnight. If there was a particular scenario at play, like the Hill End junction, for example, so that to keep that flow of traffic, then exceptions could be made.
But it's certainly
If you have
something,
one out at
it's certainly something that we could take it away and just looked at in terms of the infrastructure. So, it's on board. Thanks, Chair. Assuming that we move ahead with the report today, can you tell me, Peter, roughly what the process is from now on before we finalise what was in the plan? What I was wanting to know was, will the planning department comment on all the individual sites and highlight any particular issues? What I had in mind as an example was the site at Barleynow Road, which we're proposing to add in. The obvious thing that springs to mind with that one is, where are all the children going to go to school?
Mm-hmm.
And assuming they're all going to go to Newbattle High School, the older children that is, that's going to generate possibly another 50 to 100 cars travelling along Crawley Road every day, every morning and afternoon. And that's going to add to an already congested road. So I just wondered about the process so that we can have another look at these sites before they finally go into the plan.
Yes. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I did see today that hopefully we endorse the paper, but if there's going to be amendments with the amendment, hopefully we just crack on and endorse the paper. That's then given to the planners. They then go and carry out the work. It will then come back to a further workshop for the elected members to get involved in, and then it will come back into a planning committee. So we're actually got a process where everybody has been involved from the beginning to the end as elected councillors within the Dublin Council. So that's format I was looking for us to take, because I do accept the amount of sites that the planners will be maybe saying they don't want to keep in for X amount of reasons, and the elected members themselves may say, well, actually, no, there are other reasons, that are material reasons that mitigate going back. You continue to go back in, bearing in mind if you put one in, you have to take another one out, or vice versa. So, that would be the intention, Councillor Bowen. All that's acceptable.
But we'll get another bite of the cherry in terms of the individual sites. And
Yeah, I've got a whole basket one for Chair.
would be helpful nevertheless, pulling on from Councillor Drummond's lead, we identify the absolutely not sites at this meeting. Start the process running.
Sure. Yeah. From our point of view, yes, we will assess each site. Set out the consequence of that, and then as we move forward, from an officer's point of view, try and put in order, shall I say, of these are maybe better sites or higher priority ones than the next day, and then you almost start picking from the list. But if you want to take some off the list now, that's fine as well.
Right, fine. Councillor Mulligan, I'm kidding. I'm really keen to get us to the stage where we can come back to the point on you, but just something to keep in mind with Douglas Court.
One of the areas that I did look in here, and I want to apply is the Barleynow stage fire, the additionality. I I would have thought if you were going to add any additionality up there, you would look at some of the brownfield sites, like say the old sawmill and stuff like that. And I was kind of baffled as to why an agricultural site was coming in and the brownfield site wasn't being considered, because that's if I could see that in here. But I want to come back on the point Councillor McEwen made and a couple of other people have asked about, because I think there's a wee bit of confusion in what they're asking. What they're saying is we've got sites in that are developed, and the answer we're getting is actually on a detailed planning consent, because that's when the 3-year deal kicks in. If you back in the detailed planning permission for that site, you get that, you've got 3 years to start it. But when you put a site in, and I'll give an example, Red Hugh, for example, I think it went into the local development plan way back 2003. And nothing has happened in it. And another part of Red Hugh been put in, and nothing's happened with that. Now, the problem is, they just sit there and they've got permission. But in a local development plan, at some stage we were talking about, if sites weren't coming forward, that they would be removed for historic local development, because that's what the big worry to me here is that you're continuing to put new sites in because these sites aren't coming forward, but these sites aren't coming out. They're not being removed for the historical ones. So when developers come forward later on and say, right, we've actually got an engineering solution for Red Hugh, and I'm just using that as an example. I have no idea why it's not being different.
That's a good example.
But if the developers come forward in 10 years' time and say to us, as we stand at the moment, we found a solution to developing Red Hugh, we can get on with it. The Bible's already been published as in the local development plan, so therefore it will be dealt with as an allocated site. But by that time, you've chucked in all these other additional sites. And that's the big worry for me, is that all these sites that are sitting with historical consent, if they all come forward with what you're adding, I'm quite point blank. The infrastructure couldn't take it. The infrastructure simply couldn't take it. And that's the bit that worries me. We're getting a wee bit confused here on that 3-year deal. If you come in for the detailed planning consent and you didn't start within 3 years, it falls. But the minute you're in a local development plan, I can see no way of removing something the local development plan, so it sits there.
Well, you can remove it. See, that's all.
That's
Categorise it. We could go through an exercise. No. Because all you do is you add to put another sites in. I mean, it just becomes like that. But we did look at, as I said to Peter, I'm sick and tired of sites lying there. And I'll use that example because I think that should be out in local plan personally, but because I don't know if it can, if that site will ever be overcome the problems that are there. And I think it better not be the council that are trying to make it overcome, because it's a big pay check waiting for that at the end of the day as well, not coming in to us, we're out of the way. Because it's a hell of a responsibility looking up the bridge, as we all know, getting that bridge. But Dalhousie's got to be one-way traffic, well, because of the structure, so. I know.
Making a fresh shoot comes on stream, the effect that will then have on bother again last week, that kind of strip. If anything happens there, if you know yourself, you stick a set of roadworks in any of the areas there at all, the main routes in, the rest of the place just grinds to a halt. And there's no plans in here at all to upgrade Sheriff Hall or any of these other issues. And that's the bit that really concerns me.
What maybe could be included, just looking at the historical sites, that's when it comes back. Right, Councillor Scott.
Just one quick thing. I'm always confused, like when you get these sites, I'd say Red Hugh or whatever, and it's been agreed years and years ago. Are the developers' contributions actually agreed then? Or are they only agreed when the planning permission is actually, you know, how the full planning permission in principle? Because that worries me a great deal, because in, 5, 10, 15 years, the changes to a place can be quite immense. And if you've got an old developer's contribution at that time, they might be totally unrealistic, like for roads, for schools, we haven't even got a supermarket. So obviously the next time we would like a place for a supermarket put in near there, because we have got food poverty in Woodbridge and in Grange. And one, if you can't get to a sort of supermarket for cheap food, then your poverty gets worse, obviously. So we need solutions now to some of our problems of the building that exists. So that would be really important to me, whether those developers' contributions when they come into play, because if we make them flexible enough that actually they can be, updated to what we require now rather than in the past.
Right, planning permission in principle does not trigger developer contributions. It's only when a detailed planning application comes in to the council, and we're supposed to work in tandem up the line of a developer contribution, because there used to be a time where you got planning permission, but you didn't actually get it issued until the developer contributions were agreed, and that could maybe take a year and a half to do. So then that triggered in, but anything in principle does not trigger a developer contribution, only when it's actual details that come up from the committee stuff.
So none of these proposals have.
None of the sites that are in the local plan
Well,
are developed.
you have to take into account all the development that's going to happen as well as what is in the plan.
Yeah, the way the system operates is that if you're allocating a site into a local plan, you should at that point have an idea of what the consequences are. You need to extend school A, you need to change junction B, etc. So you then set that out in the local plan in broad terms. So in the current plan, for example, you have settlement statements, lists of sites, the implications of these. So that's your policy framework, which captures what you can then claim for. When you then work through the plan application process and lock in as part of that process the Section 75 developer contributions, you're then into the detail. It's X amount of money on X date after building X units and index linked, etc., to recover the funds required to deliver the infrastructure which you said you would do back in the plan. So you set the policy framework, detail, etc. If plans change, then there are scopes that if you need contributions to mitigate the impact. Most developers are reasonable enough to say that if you're now, instead of sending children to school A, you're now sending to school B, that's a reasonable position to say, well, actually the rules changed a bit, so we've moved on. So you can make that adjustment. Yeah, so that's
Well, I just want to make sure that it's.
yeah, I just wanted to say what you couldn't necessarily say is, look, we suddenly now want to build a whole new railway line, and suddenly, that's not in the local plan, but suddenly we want developers to pay for it, because that's not in that policy framework. So you've got to be reasonable about it, and there are tests that you have to meet.
Like quickly, because what that's now started is to move on, because we're run round the pinhead quite a while. So I know I'm going to let people in, just trying to explain to people that might be a good idea for them to think if they need to speak. Yeah,
Well, I would not come back with any point there because I'll make sure that answer's clear. I think what Ellen's asking is, for example, the early one, when that was allocated under government guidance a 5% affordable housing, not 25%, and that's what will apply to it.
Yeah.
It will also be on the area of what the school enrolment at that stage. If we thought there was going to be 0.4 children at that stage, if the legal deal's been signed, that's the only money you'll get for it. You will not get the new thinking. And that's what I'm saying. That's what's wrong with infrastructure. And what you will find though is, if the numbers for kids didn't come along, you'll have to give them money back. So if it goes up the way, we fit the bill. If it goes down the way, you get the money back. So, and if I'm wrong here, please correct me. But I just want to be clear to all elected members here.
Yeah, the first point Councillor was making was that, that we've got a 25% affordable housing policy. Remember, but historically that wasn't the case. It was between 5 and 10%. So depending on almost cycle, depends on Shawfair was 20%, slightly larger. Yeah. So depending on what you cited, depending on what the percentage.
That's what you can ask for.
But the point is correct about the risk. The risks of the council in terms of if we underspend, we return the money. But if we overspend, we didn't get a chance to take extra.
Right. Councillor Clark, Councillor Snell.
Final point for me, Chair.
I want to try now.
Final point for me, just a comment.
We're not actually making a decision.
So the road networks, Derek's team and Rods have been doing some good work in terms of traffic orders, making it mandatory for manual control. I do think that's made a difference. And in terms of the point that Councillor Kenzie raises, there is benefits to house building. So, for example, a private development site with 1,000 houses, say in Shawfair, and it's 20%. 25% now, but at the time's 20%. That allows us 200 houses for allocation, either council or a registered social landlord. So there is positives to that.
That's also.
Yeah, it's been a good discussion because there's obviously a huge financial question coming away. But I think what you were saying to us, Chair, and speaking to as well, we can't get away from the 8851. We therefore can't get away from the 1660. We could mitigate the 1660 with revenue. We could mitigate the financial burden with better contribution. But that's about what we can do.
Right, okay. Are we okay about endorsing the paper with the couple of amendments that have been pulled in today? To only to give the planners an instruction to crack on with the shortlisted sites, and I will guarantee that the process that will be followed will, that when they're ready, they will come back to a workshop. I say workshop because getting their plans round and having everybody in the room is actually quite a good way of dealing with it. A workshop, and then that will then be further considered a planning committee, which will then go into being where we're getting to the finalisation of the local plan. Likewise, on economic development and community facilities, stroke benefits, we do the same exercise by having a workshop to look at the allocated sites or allocating sites, also looking at the ones that have not been developed out yet. They've been in a local plan for a number of years as well, and maybe doing an exercise where we categorise them as well. So that will all come through a workshop. I'll go back to contact committees. Is everybody happy with that?
Yeah. Yes, that's it.
That's what's here.
Please.
Could I
Try my best.
nevertheless, I was unable to provide a block to attend this. There's the addition of a site, Kipian East Hatchet. This is a coalescence issue and it was subject to a campaign, as is well known years ago. I think it's very important to put that on the list. There was only, I think, one councillor from the ward. I just flat out. I don't realise.
Councillor Mackenzie.
Thanks. I'll respond directly to Councillor Smell, can't you?
Yeah.
So I was at the seminar, and I was personally wished that site be included. My thinking is this: there is a lot of discussion in the community council, etc., about the sites generally. And I counted up on my fingers and toes that they were absolutely not ever in support of 60% of the proposed sites. So when I look at Mayfield, these houses, there is a need for more housing. That's in my inbox every single day. We have a perfect new school in these houses. The rules for that primary school are, they're not generous. You know, I mean, we will support that school, but we could actually do more kids. Those sites specifically, Peter, would support these houses primary. Now, in terms of the expanding conurbation, we also can't expand that town settlement to the north of the Greenbelt. To the west, the Lingerwood site, I think, is already allocated for the next 10 years. There was a couple of sites south, which is the Lawfield Farm, Lawfield East and West, so they're at the top of Mayfield. Why I didn't pick those sites for additional is because if we did build those sites, then all the new people that come in would need to drive right up the road and right through Mayfield. So being that if the elected member is choosing to increase the numbers, which I think we need to, for me, and you're never going to please everybody, but for me, those sites down at the bottom of the road, stops people having to drive up through the town. It's right in the right area for the catchment area for that brand new primary school, which is fantastic facility. In terms of the doctors and stuff, I think they might actually go to the Alki, so if they've been really parochial about it, it does actually lessen the infrastructure burden on my own ward, but to the detriment of.
Shall we take this up at the next workshop?
That was my thinking, so it's on record, that's why I wanted to include it.
Okay.
A great suggestion.
You've had an explanation. Personally.
Yeah, I indicate strongly that I will be supporting any additional new house sites. I'm expecting the whole says, I simply cannot support any additional.
Same.
Oh,
It's not often good, me, Derek.
We've got coming from Bonnie, but getting 6 houses. Anyway, right, okay, so I better put that to the vote then, so it's on record. For the shortlist time. Paper in front of you today, 5.1 as amended. Is that agreed? Sorry, is that, yes, I'll just put it straight to the committee. Is that agreed that it goes forward to the next stage with the plan? Yes. No. Those against it?
I think it's got to go ahead, so. And we can see no reason. I think it's.
Just about right, yeah.
I'd like to abstain.
You're pretty much, you're in addition.
You wish.
The motion is that we move forward with 5.1 and mandate I let the planners go and work on shortlisted sites and we'll report back to a further lunch. That's every week. Right, well, I'll move it then if I'll say that.
I'm for moving it, but no.
Sorry, guys, I'm only going to second or so, as I went falls.
Well, I'll second his.
Oh, sorry. You don't want it to go. Right, we'll vote on that, the votes again. Well, the other company to have, yes, so it basically. And I'm like, do this, yes. Votes 12-2.
Perfect. Carried.
Right. Okay, that then takes us to 5.2, which is another piece of work that's been done. Again, it will form part of the plan as well, and that is with regard to green development and new battle strategic green space.
Thank you, Chair. This report seeks approval of the Green Belt Review and the new battle strategic green space safeguard assessment findings and to incorporate them into the preparation of the MLD2 proposed plan. As part of the local plan review, the council was required to review the Green Belt in Mid Lothian and provide an evidence base if it wishes to retain the new battle strategic green space safeguard. These were requirements of the evidence gate check report issued by Scottish ministers. The two designations are policy designs or policy tools designed to positively contribute towards creating a sense of settlement and sense of place. It's also to contribute towards community, to enable access to countryside activities and opportunities, and to also enhance biodiversity in the environment. The review and evidence base is attached to the report includes plans which show potential additions to the designations, the recommendations for the committee to approve the findings of the Midlothian Green Belt Review and the findings of the new Belt Strategic Green Space Safeguard Assessment.
Right, thank you very much. Questions, comments? Councillor Scott.
Yes, it was just one of the points from the workshop that like that Peter picked up that there would be additional that is sort of green belt over from Bonnerig down, you know, depicting the differences between the wards.
Yeah, we'll look at that, Chair. We'll look at that. But just to let you know, as well as Green Belt and Blue Belt and Strategic Green Space, there's other designations that potentially provide protection to the natural and built heritage. You know, you'll be familiar also with conservation areas and special landscape areas. So there are other mechanisms. And one of the key things in the plan process is to justify why you're protecting a particular area. So some of them are nuanced because of the rationale behind it. Definitely look at that. Councillor Scott.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Snell.
Yeah, I just want to note that in this very good report, we are continuing to protect Talbot Park and Campbell Park. But these were actually slightly put down as ones that a developer wanted to develop in the long grass area, I believe. Maybe that's perfectly legitimate, but it struck me as extremely odd.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the designations, not just the green belt, but other designations doesn't stop developers promoting sites. And it's a question of, as we get into that detailed assessment, you weigh up all those matters. So obviously the weight of green belts, particularly important, along with other designations. So that will come out in the detailed assessment.
Okay. Agree with that. Well done for getting that speaker like that. Very important. That then takes us on to 5.3, which is parking standard. Peter.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is to seek agreement to the adoption of new parking standards as planning guidance, which are attached to the report Appendix A. The loading of the development plan included a commitment to prepare supplementary guidance and planning guidance on a number of topic areas. In addition to the stated topic areas in the plan, the council has the scope to adopt additional guidance. One of the topic areas that needs further clarification is with regard to parking standards for new developments. And to be clear, this is separate to any review the council undertakes relating to parking policies covering fees and charges, traffic management, or on-street parking restriction. Planning guidance does not form part of the development plan, but the council's adoption of it will give weight to planning decisions. The new parking standards will replace the existing standards which were approved in March 2015 and are required in response to NPF 4, which seeks to reduce the dependency on car travel, parking, and promote active travel and the use of public transport. In response to the standards, move from a minimum standard to a maximum standard. Parking standards were subject to a public consultation, which is referenced in section 4 of the report and Appendix B. Appendix C of the report provides a comparison between the 2015 standards and the proposed new standards. The report sets out that an SEA screening process, which needs to be followed if the committee wants to adopt the new standard. It's recommended that the committee note the content of the report and agree to the adoption of parking standards, instruct officers to undertake the required SEA procedures, and also to instruct officers to publish the new parking standards on the council's website. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor McKenzie.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair. Sorry for getting everybody's wrath. Can I object to one of the points on the 3.3? Other than that, sorry, Peter, I should say it's a great report. But the premise that we need to reduce parking and new developments, I think for me, fundamentally, that's what I'm thinking. So this week I was listening to the news and the UK government are bringing in a scheme to reduce electricity prices for certain key sectors of the economy, one of which is automotive manufacturing. So on one side, the government's saying, well, that's a thing, and we want to encourage it, which is building cars. And when people have saved up the pennies, they buy cars and they use them because it's a great way of getting around. But then on the other hand, we seem to be saying we would like to penalise the public and make it more difficult to use your car. I think we're naive if we think that that will actually change people's behaviour. Just those statements. Well, I say I have that effect on people. But I think we're naive if we think that our policy will actually affect people's behaviour. All that will happen is that people will park the car where they can. And because there's not adequate car parking spaces, they'll bump up on the pavements, they'll park over folks' driveways, they'll drive around in circles, cursing and swearing. And even if they're living in house, I wouldn't need to look too far outside this room, shall we say, to find people that have got parking tickets for parking. So I would fully support the paper here. The team's done a great job with that, and you are trying to square an impossible circle. But are we really making the right decision by pulling out policy to reduce parking? So maybe if I just have one wee question on is if we don't adopt this, what's the worst?
Yeah, it's an understandable point. Yeah. I think for the last, it has been about 20 years now, the Scottish Government, through various policy initiatives, has tried to move an emphasis towards active travel, public transport, higher density development, and move away from, and actually reduce car journeys. So this is sort of picking up on that trend. It's set out again in NPF 4, which runs with those themes of promoting local living, 20-minute neighbourhoods, etc. So this is sort of tying into what the trend has been and what the government policy is encouraging us towards. And to be fair, I think it's probably good for placemaking as well. What the risk is if you don't adopt it, you've got choices. You could just not adopt it and just stick to the 2015 standards, for example, or come up with other ones. The risk is if you end up with a planning application dispute and you have NPF 4 saying one thing and the council policies saying a different thing, and there's sort of judgments being made, the court decision is going to go with council's 2015 policy approach or a more recent 2023 for they go for the recent approach. So there's a risk appeal. I wouldn't say it's a large risk, it's just in it.
And I just maybe come in support of Councillor Mackenzie, because I think what brought it home to me on Monday when we're going round the LRB visits, that in actual fact, we went into some of the more traditional properties from yesteryear and we could hardly move at all. We went into a new estate that's perhaps 5 years old, and the difference in the way that people can park as opposed to those areas where it's just a nightmare. It does bring it home to you that maybe it's not as wrong as we think it is. And I mean, you know, to be perfectly honest, Scottish Government in a way have actually just near enough abandoned now the move forward in terms of being able to reduce car usage. And you're not going to reduce car usage if you go onto electric cars. You know, and we're promoting that as well. So it's a real fine balance. I mean, I don't know how wrong it is at the moment, particularly in new developments. When you actually go back, you see some of the more traditional developments. I mean, going back built out in the 60s, and you see you can't park there at all. You know, and it's that's sorry, Chris.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm looking at Rosewell, where it's put at 1.5 spaces per home. I don't quite understand how that would work. But
If that were a good neighbour.
exactly. But I mean, next door to me, there's a house of 4, and they've got two, they all drive. So there's 4 cars outside that. Because the bus from Rosewell only goes to Butterbrook, if you're going to Edinburgh. So therefore, I've got to take my car into Bonneville, find a parking space to get on a bus. So the infrastructure isn't there to allow us to have fewer cars. Both I and my husband need a car so that we can do the things that we need to do. And the active travel is coming along, but like so today, I would have taken I could take my bike down to Bonneville, but I wouldn't do it today. I wouldn't do it, in many days of the year, because it would just be too weather friendly to do it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that many years now, car ownership is increased. So if you look at areas across the district which are maybe built like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, there's often a shortage of parking, as you made reference to, Councillor. And then if you look at a very modern estate, there's actually quite sufficient sort of parking. I guess we're just trying to move the dial back a notch rather than go all the way back. So it's just trying to put a bit of measure in it. Otherwise, you just end up with very much car-dominated developments, car-dominated settlements, and sort of quality of place trying to encourage more active travel, which has not the benefits just about health and the environment, but socialising, networking, and then that obviously encourage public transport. You need to sort of push and pull sort of scenarios. You need to improve public transport as well as we place some restrictions on the car. So, but I suppose the bottom line is, Chair, it's the standards are just following the national policy and the national trend.
Councillor Smith.
Here from Councillor Mackenzie's point, when we talk about 1.5 spaces per home stroke unit, 1.5 strikes me as a number that will lead to a pub chat because we're almost the half. And off the wall comment. If a developer said we absolutely must have 2, I think we should charge them for the relaxation policy. But I think, Peter, you're telling us we have no option.
We're talking about 1.5. It's because you're dealing with developments and much bigger numbers of houses, so you're sort of
even so
rounding up. Some of the parking may be on site, some are communal parking.
Some people will have 1 car, some people will have 2.
It might be helpful. Just for example, just got a couple of examples here. For example, a very recent Wimpy site in Bilston for 214 units, as under the current policy, 370 spaces. Under the new scheme, that will go down to 331. So that's a sort of scale of change. There are some flip sides to this. Elected members might remember the site at Winter Square, which 12 affordable flats, because it's affordable housing, the standards difference, the requirement was 12 spaces, it would actually go up to 19. So there's some trading off that is going on. But in general terms, you would see a reduction of car parking in general terms. And the way you see the biggest reduction is, say, town centres, where you'd be more supportive of a development which they require sort of car parking.
I think the difficulty is that you don't always get public transport coming along. It's, I think we're all facing that dilemma. But we built the houses and get public transport. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair. Could I just second Councillor Mackenzie's usual motion amendment? Whatever it is.
That focuses the mind. Thanks. How do people feel about this? Get off there. Leave it as it is. Yeah, we need to get a slap in the hand from the Scottish Government for the not following.
I think the infrastructure has got to come first before we put to town, because I think it's infrastructure first.
So we're quite happy to stick with the existing 2015 falls. Okay, the next item is 5.4, which is the appeals.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise the committee of the Scottish Minister's decision regarding an application for a battery energy storage system facility and associated works at land south of the A68 Salford Heath. The nature and scale of development meant that the required Section 32 application and associated planning permission was determined by Scottish ministers, with the local planning authority and other agencies and other parties being consultees. The committee considered a report on the proposal at its meeting in December 2024 and reviewed the minutes at its meeting in January 2025. And shortly thereafter, submission was made to the Scottish ministers. Scottish ministers issued a determination letter on the 12th of May 2025. The ministers granted consent for the Section 32 application and also granted planning permission subject to conditions. A copy of the determination letter, including the conditions attached to the report, Appendix A. The covering report sets out in Section 3 the key findings lifted from the formal decision. It is recommended that the committee notes the Scottish Minister's decision to grant permission for a battery energy storage system at land south of the A68 Dalkeith. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Scott.
I would like to move that the Lothian Council ask for a judicial review on this decision for the following reasons. On the ground of safety, these type of installations pose real and acceptable fire and explosion risks that would release extremely toxic fumes that would be carried by the wind. There is a campus of 2,500 children as well as housing, many very young and some extremely medically fragile. The potential of toxic fumes, for example, highly corrosive hydrochloric acid, could seriously affect their health. There will also generate noise, which may adversely impact on some of our children with ASN who are noise sensitive. There will be more serious incidents regarding the ESS plant, Aberdeenshire, 21-225, Essex, 19-225, California, 16-125, that was in 35 and 4 years, one of which reignited a month later, and people had to be evacuated over 2 square miles, and another one in South Africa and also California. Lithium-ion batteries, are these the best batteries when there are new technologies available that do not pose the dangers of thermal runways? I do not feel that this determination in any way reflects the objections of many of the elected members at that particular meeting. Page 140 says, this determination letter does not make any comment on fire risk or the safety of the school campus. Many impacts were set out very clearly at the meeting. I objected as did others. I was also aware that had the planning authority made an objection within the timescale, given the Scottish ministers must hold a public inquiry. So we didn't realise that, and that was maybe just stop our radar. And we were talking all the risks with little employment, no community benefit in such a project, and which is potentially dangerous for our most precious asset, which is our children. So that would be what I'd like to know.
Right, well, thanks, but before we go any further, I'm going to bring it in because you just overruled me, it's legal, so I'm going to bring it up.
Thanks, Chair, just to clarify a couple of points. Whether or not the council takes legal action in any particular cases actually delegated.
Can you speak up a bit?
Sorry. The question about whether or not the council initiates or he defends a legal action in a particular case is a matter for the enhanced director of police. And the other thing I would also say that members may wish to go against other consideration in this, because whether or not the question of taking legal action is actually exempt information. So by resolution, the committee can discuss this matter in private if it needs to do so, because that's in terms of the exempt information. So it might be prudent if the committee wishes to have a discussion about this, to resolve, to discuss the matter in private, and then what's the next agenda item. But whether or not you wish to discuss the matter privately is a matter for the committee by resolution. But the normal legal advice in these circumstances would be that the matter is discussed in private by the committee.
So could we agree to have this item taken in private?
Yeah.
So
And it may be that we want to, it may not be able to be done today, but it might be that we want to actually get also council opinion, QC opinion, or Casey opinion on it as well.
so that the members are happy because the matter private have to be replaced the public or excluding for the consideration of the matter.
And we miss the date. If there's a
Well,
date
I
of the
think-
thought to get
I think we need to discuss that in private.
We'll take that out and put it at the back of the agenda now.
So if members, of the press and public would be asked to leave anything the states.
Could I not just do it another way, because we've got one other item we're talking on. Get that taken. Put a pause on 5.5 just now. And we agree to take it in private at the end of the public business. In other words, take 5.6 next. 5.5 next, and then 5.6, and then we can go on to 5.5, 5.4 and 5.
Yeah.
Right. That then takes us on to 5.5.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to advise the committee of advertisement consent application and appeal decision regarding the proposed erection of an illuminated flagpole advertisement at the Lidl site, Pennycote. The application was refused by officers under delegated authority in December 2024. A Scottish Government reporter was appointed to determine the appeal, and following a site visit, the appeal was dismissed and advertisement consent was refused on the 12th of May 2025. A copy of the appeal decision is attached to the report's Appendix A. Covering the report sets out Section 3, the key findings lifted from the formal appeal decision, and it is recommended that the committee notes the appeal decision regarding land at the Lidl site of Pennycote. Thanks, Chair.
Not that. Yeah. Here. Item 5.6, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. This is a planning application and listed building consent application for the redevelopment of high school, including erection of extension, partial demolition of buildings, landscaping, internal and external alterations and associated works at Pennycote High School, Collops Road, Pennycote. The original 1930s school building to the front of the site is a category B listed building. The redevelopment will see the demolition of the 1960s extensions to the rear of the original 1930s building, which is to be retained. expansion and refurbishment of core areas for games, sport, dining, catering, and entertainment provision, the details of which are listed in paragraph 3.3 of the report. Existing Broomhill Day Care Centre is being retained, and the existing music club building will be retained and repurposed for use associated with the school. The proposed extension is a 3-storey flat roof extension with 2-storey elements. The overall footprint of the extension looks to infill and extend the original 1930s building in courtyard to form a square footprint building. The redevelopment will take place in 6 phases as set out in paragraph 3.7 of the report. The site is within the built-up area of Pennicott and is currently used for education and community purposes, and as such, there's a presumption in favour of appropriate redevelopment of the site. The proposed extension is an attractive one design, whilst complementing the host 1930s listed building. It's compatible to its location, will not result in detrimental impacts on neighbouring residential properties, and will provide the necessary facilities for a modern high school. There have been no representations received and 6 representation responses as outlined in section 5 and 6 of the report. The recommendations to grant planning permission and listed building is sent subject to conditions.
Thank you very much. Peter, questions, comment? Good to go.
It's very pleasing to see one of the most important 1930 facades in the building because I started this scheme.
The best bit of the school, actually. Right, is that good?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I just thank members of the public for the attendance today.
Can I just say to those joining virtually that the private items will be recorded separately, so you will have been sent another invite for the private items.